Alright. Y'all already know what's up, man. We back in the 4 letters about Mexico with Brazil de Bourbourg. We're in section 10. Now, y'all already know how it is with this one. Not much that I can say or give in relation to an opinion. We just translating this one, y'all. So let's keep it going. So diving into section 10, here we go. We can understand the diverse characters attributed to the Chichimecs, sometimes as wild, cruel, and nomadic, and at other times as civilized and no less skilled than the Toltecs in all arts. This is how Sahagún shows them in various aspects, although he expressly states at the end of his historical chapter that the name Chichimeca only designated the populations of the north, up to the line of the Mixtecs provinces. In the south, this name is exchanged with that of Nonoalca, those of the expanse or who are expanded, under which, in general, the inhabitants of Yucatan were understood. Thus, according to the classification of this writer, the families and nations of Mexico are all Toltec, but not all Chichimec. We will examine later where this distinction comes from. In the meantime, let's note the role of the latter as emanations of gases, more or less putrid, contained within the earth, originating from this central underwater focus to which the Tlatoani attributes the final effects of the cataclysm. From the nature of their sudden and often ephemeral appearances, Ahuacan, Tepehuacan, says the Codex Chimalpopoca, meaning in the waters and in the mountains, came the application made to nomadic populations of North America, particularly those who lived around the Gulf. This is what so completely identifies the Mixcoas, known as the leaders of the Chichimecs of Mexico, with the Azwins, and then with the Maruts of the Veda, who could so easily be confused with the winds of heaven, while in reality they only symbolized the inner breaths of the earth, hence the title of Presnimatara, which is given to them, meaning those who have the earth as their mother, according to Sayana and Wilson. If they are otherwise called Anavanam, which have no horses, it is, as the same author also notes, because their chariot was drawn by deer, emblems of the Chichimecs in the particular hieroglyph of the island of Guadalupe and North America. Hence, the identification that Baron Diekstein makes of the Maruts with the Arias, still wild and wandering in the woods. This fact alone might perhaps be inconclusive in your eyes, but you will see a host of other similar ones arise as we advance, and you will recognize with what ease all the gods of the Vedas return to those of Tiamoxtli. And then, see how wonderfully everything is linked? For if the Toltecs are the volcanic agents that overthrow the Chichimec Empire, if they are, as you will recognize shortly, identical with the Kabiri of the Greeks, in the Chichimecs you will undoubtedly have already found the Telchins or Telchenes. If you remember what M. Guignol wrote about them, quote, "The Telchenes, said tradition, killed Apis. There is also talk of their revolt against Bacchus." Are these traces of ancient struggles between religions and enemy tribes? Or should we view the Telchins from a different perspective? And when another legend shows them pouring the sulfurous waters of the Styx onto the animals and plants that they kill by this means, should we recognize in them physical powers, harmful influences of the sea, and the infernal abyss on plants and living beings? These influences were dominant in primitive ages, close to the great catastrophes of our realm. Also, the old memories of the Rhodians bore that the Telchines, established on their island in the number of 9, had to disappear so that the Heliads could come to inhabit it. Rhodians? Do you find the coincidence remarkable? But have you paid attention to the number 9? 9 Telchines and 9 Chichimec chiefs, according to the Codex Chimalpopoca, as you can verify as soon as I have finished translating this part of this important document. 9 Chichimec chiefs, Mixicodal, pronounce X like the French chi, Mexicodal, Chehunel, Munich, Quahunicol, names of the 4 main ones. Then the other 5, Itlacluqui, Necamero, Amimero, Iquahua, and Nahuacan. These 9, sir, are as many locations or mountains where their action, both beneficial and harmful, was especially exercised, like that of the Rodin del Genes. However, what must have already struck you in this name is the syllable Chi, fundamental in the name of the Chichimex, Shimex, Chi, and Shi being identical in ancient languages. But it is not just this word that is remarkable, it's the whole name of Telchin, which is pure Nahuatl, and whose meaning is entirely in line with the explanations of the symbolism mentioned earlier. Telchin, or Telchin in Greek, means exactly the liver that burns, or the burning liver. It is also the regular plural of the Mexican telquil, which Molina describes as one who enjoys the misfortune of another, malevolent, rejoicing in the harm of others. It is a compound word of te, the liver, in its ordinary sense, but whose primitive sense it is that of the trapped gas that has found its way out. Chitl, from she, or shitl, from shy, she, a primitive already known, and itl, everything that moves and agitates to enter or exit, which gives del shitl, what moves to exit the hearth, or the trapped gas. Observe also this, that del shitl and its derivatives, according to Molina, all correspond to the idea that the Greeks generally had of the Telchins and the harm they could cause. To conclude, I return to the book of Mr. Guignot and continue, quote, they, the Telchins, appear in the most diverse traits, sometimes as benevolent geniuses as well as skilled, sometimes as malevolent, jealous demons devoted to magic. This latter idea seems especially inseparable from their good or bad character. Authors and creators of the first idols, they communicate to them this equivocal power that makes them in turn an object of gratitude and execration. Moreover, their power is boundless. They melt metals, they break the barriers of nature, they turn men's hearts at will, and bend even the will of the gods without resistance. It should therefore not be surprising to see the Telchins themselves pass into the sphere of ancient divinities of nature and their sacred ministers, so much so that they sometimes appear to identify with the Kaberi. Yes, precisely as the Toltecs identify with the Chichimex and vice versa, as seen in Sahagum and in the original documents. The Telchins, as we said earlier, had killed Apis. Nothing is more true, since it was they, as Plutonian powers, who had caused the explosion of the great volcano, the ruin of the Atlantic region, personified in Osiris. We can therefore see how the struggle in which the Toltecs engaged against the Chichimex, according to the accounts of Ixtlahuochitl, symbolizes the agitation of the volcanic elements within the earth. For if, on the one hand, the Chichimex offer the image of vapors and gases condensed at the bottom of the earth, on the other, the Toltecs, as far as I can determine, the meaning of the expressions concerning them are at first glance the powers of water on the surface of the sea, and the water from springs, replacing the gases within the mountains, like the Heliades replace the Telchins in Rhodes. Then, perhaps, in a more refined cosmogony, the vapors that bring the mud heaps where these gases are enclosed to boil and excite them to lift the earth's crusts. The time has therefore come to make you aware of the name of the Toltecs and to reveal its origin to you. Let's start with Telin, which the histories indicate as their capital, and see what insights we can find in the analysis of this name. It is striking at first glance to anyone who knows even a little of Mexican grammar by the identity it presents with the name of Metzli, or the crescent. Indeed, what it ordinarily expresses is the idea of a curved country, or inclined land. Its first syllable, tol, a primitive form of dola, doloa, means to lower, incline the head, according to Molina, and to twist, to bend, he says elsewhere, with the local particle, lan, for tlan, or tan, meaning the land or the place, we get the idea of a curved or inclined land, which is the exact meaning of the word Telin. From the same verb comes Telin, the reed or cane, whose head bends at the slightest wind. Thus, Telin could also mean reed bed or marshland, indicating the famed land of the curve or the crescent, which, according to tradition, was astonishingly fertile in many places, yet low and marshy. In its active sense, doloa is translated by Molina as to swallow, which then gives Telin the meaning of swallowed land, an idea that fits very well in the current context. But if Telin is the swallowed land, and at the same time the land of the curve or the crescent, these two names can apply equally well to the place where it was swallowed. By the curving water along the shores of the crescent, either within the large gulfs of the north and south, or along the convex shore facing east. We find a continuous identification of the male idea with the female idea, of the content and the container of Telin, the swallowed land, and Tlaco, Telin, the swallowing ocean. We may note that tol in the Quechua language is a verb whose past tense is tolan, and like tulan, it signifies abandonment, nudity, etc. In the Mayan language, tol means to feel, and unlike in Quechua, is the past tense of the verb. So tulha or tula would mean filled or submerged with water. In the final analysis, tol or tul appears to originate from ol or ul, to flow, to come, according to Quechua, or perhaps from huili in the Nahuatl language, meaning liquid rubber, the black ball in the game of handball, which becomes the hieroglyph for water filling the two gulfs. The pretext T would be a preposition making two, which means the eye's orbit in Quechua, symbolizing the abyss that the black ball feels like its pupil. In Mexican, tu, the primitive of ton, is the heat of boiling water. Toy, contracted from tool, could therefore have meant the boiling liquid, or the coming of boiling heat of ignition. With teca, to extend, the whole word tolteca would thus mean to extend the curved, and Toltecal, the Toltec, would be what extends the curved or swallowed, or perhaps the boiling water, etc. These etymologies therefore all return to the same idea, which in many respects makes the Toltecs one of the telluric powers destructive of the land of the crescent, as shown in the paintings of the Codex of Dresden and the Tlatoani manuscript. In these documents, you will first see the Chichimecs or Chichimecs with black bodies and bloody eyes, busy rubbing wood to start a fire. Then elsewhere, the Toltecs, these artists par excellence, as they are usually translated, drilling a bowl with an instrument similar to our Cooper's hand drills. The black ball that they contain, surmounted by a sign which expresses the action of the water that will fill these bowls, piercing the ground as the auger pierces a barrel. This could be a representation of the American Gulfs, perhaps even the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, symbolized in one hemisphere and the other, indicating a deeper cosmological understanding of the world, merging both the natural and the supernatural in their symbolism. Such are the Chichimeca and the Toltecs, who, following the supreme power personified initially in Huehue Dielu and then in Quetzalcoatl, carve out a path through the earth between the mountains, which they initially construct. However, once their peaks are sufficiently elevated, it is the Chichimecs who will carve an eye on their foreheads, as you can also see in the same paintings. This presents us with a prototype of our Cyclops in a single eye, representing the first 7 volcanoes of the islands, or the main volcanoes of the crescent, before its destruction. These are the first leaders of the Toltecs, 7 becoming 8, as I have had the occasion to tell you, because the leaders of the Toltecs, like the kings of Telin, are the Chichimecs. Quetzalcoatl himself is considered the son of a Toltec princess and a Chichimec chief. These first 7 are therefore the 7 Kabiri, who emerged from the Western Hemisphere destined to become the Caribbean Sea. Their union with the hemisphere of the Atlantic Ocean forms the mysterious egg, suspended in temples, said to have been fathered by Leda. Now, Tlatoani in Nahuatl signifies the speaker or the orator. If we decompose this word, we find that it could mean the master of the burning path, or one who makes a hidden fire, depending on the attenuation of the first syllable. This term was initially designated for volcanic mountains before becoming a title for chiefs and kings. In both Quechua and Nahuatl, the word that captures all these nuances is nearly the same, differing only in slight tonal variations. The presence or absence of a small tongue symbol in Mexican hieroglyphs in front of the mouths of figures indicates whether they are alive or dead. When a prince rules, it signifies that he speaks, and this is synonymous with the fire erupting at the top of the mountain. It's volcano making itself heard. If he dies, it's also the volcano that extinguishes. The phrase, "he is dead" in Nahuatl also means that he is absorbed, perhaps even descended under the water. The term mo, mequili, indicates both that the deceased has been wrapped in bandages and that the volcano has been extinguished by sealing its internal path with its superimposed secretions, similar to bandages. So, the intricate duality in the interpretation of the history of Telin and the duplicity of Mexican, Quechua, and Mayan documents are entirely explained in these lines. The multi-layered symbolism elegantly merges natural phenomena, like volcanoes, with human attributes, like speech and leadership, uniting the terrestrial and celestial, the physical and the metaphysical, into a cohesive whole. Returning now to the 7 chiefs of the Toltecs, which relate to the numbers 7, 8 that I've previously mentioned, these figures are indeed the primordial gods, the progeny of the universal mother. They are the 7 great gods in Mexico, mirroring the importance of the number 7 in Egypt and other ancient cultures. These gods were created in Teotihuacan, which means the place where the gods were created. Here, the term Teotihuacan can be seen as the symbolic birthplace of the gods, an area that was originally the engulfed earth, but divinized by those who witnessed its descent into the abyss. However, Teotihuacan is not merely the tomb of the dead gods, but also the cradle of the living gods. It symbolizes the region of the new islands that emerged after the cataclysm, with volcanic fire, to gather the remnants of humanity's great shipwreck. These new gods were the 7 islands, perhaps referring to the Lesser Antilles, which are also represented as the 7 caves of Chicomostoc. In this framework, the word Teo, which can also be applied to a volcanic or chimney of a volcano, takes on an expanded meaning. It refers to the pathway or surface made of stone, Teo, and the life that exists on this solid surface, Teotl. Thus, Teotihuacan is not just a place where the gods were made, but also the cradle of Mexican religion itself. Here are the 7 great gods of ancient mythology, the 7 that become 8 when combined with the volcanic power that created them. This force serves them, sometimes modestly and invisibly, sometimes grandly when it erupts, as on the Day of Ruin. These gods are eventually reduced to a single force, volcanic energy, later elevated to the sun and other celestial bodies. So, do you believe, sir, that any of the etymologies given for the Greek word theos or theo is more accurate than this explanation steeped in ancient Mexican mythology? Here, each layer of meaning and symbol enriches our understanding not just of these ancient myths, but also of the deeply interwoven connections between language, culture, and natural phenomena. The numbers 7 and 8, the elements of fire and water, the roles of gods and chiefs, each aspect contributes to a holistic picture that is far more than the sum of its parts. Section 12. I do not need to explore here to what extent the original founders of this religion of chthonic gods were able to preserve or alter at this remote time, the notions of revealed religion as taught to us by church traditions. I will only point out that the mystical numbers related to it appear to have all originally resulted from purely natural effects. These numbers, as you know, reduce from 7, 8 to 4, then successfully to 3, 2, and 1. They could very well also serve, at the same time, as a veil for the founders of ancient religions to hide the truth from common people. The accounts of Tlatoani have been my first guide to help unravel this apparent confusion. 2 is the number of the first leaders of the Toltecs and Chichim. 2 are the first volcanoes that arise on the earth of the crescent. 4 more arise. There are 2 of the mystical numbers. Then a 7th, initially insignificant, rises with 2 mouths. It is the one that has its field tied together, and on which so many plays on words have been made in both worlds. For it is the last and the youngest. It is double. It is the number 7, 8. And since it is this one that follows the great volcano of the catastrophe, it thus becomes the leader and master of its brothers, after having been the most humble. So, aside from the 7 savior gods of Teotihuacan, the numbers 2, 4, 7, and 8 are those that we discover in Mexican documents and that I explain based on the relations of Tlatoani. However, there is a very important observation to make on this subject. It is that in the original documents such as the Popol Vuh and the Codex Chimalpopoca, these numbers appear to result from entirely different combinations. The 7 volcanoes are reduced to 1, because 1 is the power that animates them. But this power becomes in turn double and triple in the examination of the elements that compose it and whose existence had not escaped the discernment of ancient Mexico, as the documents I have just cited demonstrate very well. These mysterious numbers thus have more than one source. The oldest is certainly the most material. For it is evident, as we have just seen, that the first gods that the Americans worshipped were the locations themselves that survived the great shipwreck or perished in the cataclysm. One was the portion of the sunken continent, it is, as it was 2 with the water that surrounded it and into which it sank. 1 is the American continent, just as it is 2 with the water that surrounds it, or 2 by its topographical condition, into distinct portions, celebrated in the 2 feathers that the kings of Mexico wore on their royal crown. Hence comes one of the names of the supreme being in Haitian tradition, Iaria, which etymologically means the place of life, or the dry on the water, an idea that corresponds entirely to that presented by the name of Teotihuacan. The number 4, which is that of the 4 great gods in the Egyptian cosmology, as in the Haitian and Mexican, simply relates to the 4 major Antilles that resisted the formidable jolt of the cataclysm and are called, for this reason, the 4 supports of the sky. All other mystical numbers result from similar circumstances and will be explained in part in the course of these letters. From Teneyocan, Tlatoani continues the Chichimec leaders observed the remaining Toltecs who had escaped ruin. Initially hidden in the reeds of the swamps of Colhuacan, these Toltecs soon re-emerged and showed themselves. They even formed familiar bonds with the Chichimecs, thus civilizing them. Depending on the viewpoint, the Lesser Antilles are symbolized alternatively by these Chichimec leaders or the Toltecs. It is upon the remnants of the Ark of Telin, and by uniting with these remnants, that new islands rise to the surface of the sea. They are both Chichimecs and leaders, for all are smoking mountains. They are Toltecs, places that are extended in a curve or contorted, remnants of Telin, stone places, that is to say, solid and curved. These are the places where the fires of volcanoes will inspire men with the ideal of metallurgical arts, and from which they will later spread to all other islands to educate and cultivate the Chichimecs. It is on these privileged islands in Colhuacan, meaning place of the curve or of the serpent, on these lands rising from the waves, with their curved forms, that civilization was destined to be reborn, along with the 7 gods of Teotihuacan, 7 before, 7 after, always 7-8, as you will see later. Thus, from the material ideas born of purely local circumstances arose the fundamental principles of the society and of Chamitic religions, Hamitic religions, the sources of this civilization. The power of Orcus, fire and water, put into contact during the terrifying episodes of the cataclysm, were the phenomena that occupied the human mind. These phenomena then served as the basis for the entire dogmatic and social system. The smoke and fire of the volcano, the water of the ocean, and the steam it produced, along with the twin volcano known as Shalaru, or bound feet, were what later gave rise to the ideas of this duality, less material than that of the double continent found in all ancient cosmogonies. Studying these phenomena gradually led me to more subtle distinctions, and long before migrations had brought the elements of new societies to the other continent, the wise ancestors of the Mexicans had spiritualized their original doctrines. Recognizing the origins of volcanoes in the vast underwater chamber whose explosion had changed the face of the world, they successively personified water and fire, wet and dry, light and heat. This activity is represented in the rotary motion of the male wood and the female tree, a motion attended to mockingly by the telluric powers in the paintings of the Tlatoani manuscript. From there, all these mythological individualities arose whose functions suggest their origins and which are subsequently identified with mountains and volcanic islands, the first visible gods of antiquity. Now, in a higher sense for the initiated, the study and analysis of telluric powers leads to the discovery of a prime mover, an indication of divine omnipotence, personified in turn by the breath that had given life to Quetzalcoatl. This spiritualism, however, always remained more or less veiled for the common people. For them, the phenomena of the catastrophe were adopted to chronological stories whose origin went back to the first gods. Thus, mountains became kings, descendants of the first heroes, sons of gods. The divine forces of nature were first transformed into sacred workers, then into various corporations, whose symbolic names ultimately designated nations and tribes after having served to characterize purely topographical accidents. So, it is indeed from Orcus, from the altar's hearth, an image of that first invisible heart, that all these transformations originated. For families, this image was found in the domestic hearth, invariably composed of 3 rough stones of equal dimensions, upon which the American placed his comilo, or cornet, something still done today and which I have witnessed 1,000 times during my travels. Of these 3 stones, long forgotten now, 2 represented the 2 columns of the altar, and the 3rd represented the link that united and animated them. They represented the first 3 volcanoes, and the pot or pan represented the boiling ocean above the fires raised by Orcus. The 4 pillars of the hut or house, whose roof sheltered this domestic altar, were the symbols of the 4 great islands, the 4 chiefs who had sheltered civilization and humanity at the time of the cataclysm. There was the model of the Teocalli, the pyramid, from which emerged the combined divisions of time and space in such a way that the divisions of time corresponded to those of space and accommodated the formal principle of the institution of the god of the altar. From there came the first ritual calendar and second calendar, linked to a cosmic type of divisions of a cosmic and creative year. From there came a quadrilateral division of space. From there also came a cosmic division of time and space, according to the 6 divisions of the cosmic year, in which the work of creation was accomplished. The unity and the link of all the forces is the 7th, which is the radical or creative force, of which the other 6 are but rays or emanations in the order of a typical time, upon which were later regulated the times of the world. I cite once again your friend DX on the subject of mystical numbers, where he aptly comes in to explain their combinations. Indeed, if one takes the number 4 as the base, which is the number of the great gods, of the 4 great islands, and of the 4 chiefs or kings, and multiplies it by 13, which is the number of gods descended into the abyss, one finds 52, the number of the Mexican cycle. In turn, 52 multiplied by 7, which is the number of the 7 Toltec chiefs, gives 364, the number of days in an ordinary year. Now let us take together the 13 gods who descended into the abyss and the 7 who were saved from the shipwreck, according to the authors, and we get the number 20, which, when multiplied by 13, yields 260, the number of days in the astrological year, according to Sahagún. Examining these numbers would reveal even more in this vein, but I believe I should leave this subject to the curious. I continue with Mr. DX saying, quote, all astronomical science, all geometric science, all metrics, all rhythmics, the tact of speech, the measure of sound, as well as that of space, thus originally stem from the altar. It is a primitive hieroglyph that contains the meaning of the world discovered and laid bare, then oriented, fixed, delimited, and ordered according to the model of a wisdom that was based on the augural science of a sacred race, not of Idean the Catalysts, but of powerful men who survived the shipwreck of the primitive world. These men, you now know them. They are those who call themselves Toltecs, like the forces of nature to which they succeeded, borrowing their names and learning from them to observe and harness them for the benefit of humanity. It is from this perspective that the Chichimecs, who were in reality one with them, can be considered as the rustic or nomadic populations of North America. Populations they subjected to their will by showing them how they should make use of the phenomena they witnessed, teaching them to use fire not only for cooking their food, as can be seen in the ancient document, but also for hardening their household utensils and melting metals. Section 13. You have already noticed, sir, in reading the first pages of this letter, how much the imagination was exercised in primitive times on the concave form to the northwest and southwest, and convex to the east of the continent, which once extended to the places where the Atlantic waves now roll. However, this is only one aspect of a question that seems to renew itself infinitely, exhausting all combinations of words as well as hieroglyphs. Please open the Mexican paintings reproduced in Kingsborough and examine these images with their vivid colors and twisted figures in various poses. What is the most frequently appearing image? It's that of a rabbit in more than one place. You see it occupying the center of a basin, usually open at the top and shaped rather like a vase. This basin, you recognize it, is once again the image of the two great gulfs, giving rise to the idea of the feminine vase, a symbol of the moon, the moist and female power. The rabbit is again the symbol of the submerged land, the continent sunk into the depths. Take a look, for example, at plate 12 of the Codex Borgia. It is alive but wounded, covered in the blood that escapes from its wounds. Well, there. It is the image of the existing continent, already opened by the action of volcanoes that tear it apart, wrapped in a serpent of fire, as in plate 29. It recalls Mount Meru, entangled in the coils of the serpent Sisha, that will drag it into the abyss. Dead, its eyes are closed. Its whitish color is that of the bandages used to wrap corpses, which means that the rabbit already represents nothing more than a dead land buried under the waves. Continue leafing through the pages of the Codex Borgia. Often instead of a rabbit you will find a hare, or an animal whose character is ill-defined, or rather, which combines different characters, presenting aspects that are not always easy to understand at first glance. Would these be the distinctive features of animals that once inhabited this lost continent? I will not venture to pronounce on that. What is certain is that instead of a hare or rabbit, you will alternatively think you recognize one of these terrier dogs from the northern Mexican provinces, a kind of mole, a possum, a jackal, or an American tiger. Indeed, depending on the whim of the imagination or the glance of the moment, one can discern the topographic hieroglyph of the sunken continent, the form of one or another of these animals, in the position of a bound and prepared lamb for sacrifice, as seen in the paintings. Thus, from the multiplicity of these names and images, natural results of different ways of envisioning the outline of. From the many sketches of the sunken earth, most of the names given to the moon were born, as well as the myths and symbols related to the religions of antiquity. While going through the Mexican paintings reproduced in Kingsborough's collection, one is particularly struck by the multiplicity of these sketches. Whether living or dead, wounded or dying, you almost always find this mysterious animal stretched out on land or on waves, sometimes with the signs of life, eyes aflame, indicative of the lit craters in the condemned region, or with a gaping wound from which a torrent of blood flows, signaling the great volcano whose explosion marked the ultimate moment of ruin. Other times the animal is dead, its eyes are closed, and you would be amazed at its resemblance to the Lamb of the Apocalypse. However, it is especially noteworthy in Plate 2 and Plate 47 of the Dresden Codex, according to Kingsborough's pagination. In the first, it lies alone on a blue background, symbolic of water, its body at the moment of its last breath. In the second, it is pierced by a sword. Its head is sadly turned towards the sky, as if complaining about its fate. It hasn't yet been pierced by the sword, but is succumbing under the weight of a terrifying deity sitting on its back and holding in her hands the mysterious whip of water and fire, or rather of water vaporized by fire, the Shivalaro, threatening her victim. Well, sir, compare these images to those of the Mithraic bull found on many ancient monuments. See the plates on Cruiser Symbology translated by Mr. Grignot, and tell me if these are not absolutely identical scenes. Don't you recognize Siva on the Nandi bull, Mithra? Fire already visible in the volcanoes that cover him, overcoming the earth that the ocean is preparing to engulf. Yes, you have here simultaneously the explanation of the myth of Bacchus in relation to men and Lunas, and the connection of the Mithraic cult with the Phrygian Sabazia. You find Zagreus with the bull's head, whose body, torn apart by the Titans, is boiled in the mystical cauldron. The Gmiddle, i.e., the vase of the ocean that I explained earlier. You find Osiris, cut into pieces by Typhon, whose accomplices are identified with the Rhodian Cabin with the Rhodian Kabiri, who killed the Apis bull. Indeed, Titans, Kabiri, or murderers of Osiris, here blend with the mysterious whip of the Mexican god Xivalaro, the sling of fire and water, the telluric power that is the very soul of the bull it is preparing to tear apart. This soul, moreover, this vapor, this god holding it, is Tezcatlipoca, identified here with the fire rising from below, vaporizing this water. It is Nanahuatl. It is the embryo that has just been born, and which you will see identified with Agni, the grandson of the waters, as the Vedas call him. It is this fire symbolized in Bacchus, who rightly presented himself in Delphi as a telluric power, as a divine prophet, inspired by the underground emanations from the sacred abyss, in giving oracles alongside Apollo. Such are, sir, the metamorphoses of this myth to which the most important rites of the mysterious of Crete and Samothrace are attached in antiquity. A myth itself founded on the vague image of the earth, engulfed under the waves of the Atlantic, and whose variants are explained by the diversity of the original sketches. From there, All the names I discover on this subject in Mexican documents were born. The most common, however, is the Teochtli, the rabbit, whose image is also the most ordinary. This very name, in its oldest sense, alludes mainly to the idea of the abyss that devours all, to the ocean, och, the broad, the deep. This word is only found in Molina's vocabulary in the compound form of ochpantli, meaning a broad path, but its ancient meaning is that of an immeasurable expanse. Its primitive root, which we have already seen at work in other words, is o or u, variants of the same sounds, in which one might also recognize one of the aspects of the origin of language. A host of onomatopoeic relations that vividly struck the sensibility of early men are lost to us, says Mr. Renan on this subject. Indeed, but they seem to reappear when one manages to strip away the layers from old world words in the Mexican or Quechua language. This O, or particularly U, perhaps exclamations uttered by the witnesses of the cataclysm, naturally open the mouth, letting out breath, whose sound or noise, as everyone will observe, is always expressed by a Z, identical here with that of the S. Well, sir, if you add an affix or suffix, any vowel, to this constitutive consonant in the Mexico-Guadalupan or Guadeloupean group, you immediately have a monosyllable that conveys the idea of something escaping with more or less effort from an opening. You have a rupture or tear. Az, meaning vapor. Feather, something light. As, meaning blood. Is, meaning the root that pierces the earth. Oz means the entrance, the opening, the cave in Nahuatl, and even in Latin, ooze, meaning the buzzing of a fly. Za or sa means to shine, to roast, to burst. Z means to turn, or ze means to turn. Z means to tear, to open. Zo means to pierce. Zu means to suck, to absorb, to make a sound, etc. Add any other consonant as an affix or suffix, the word changes but retains some analogy with the first change, the Z or S, to ch or ch, to x or shish, or to tsiz. And you have a variation of another kind, but the variant is always more or less related to the initial idea. All consonants in the Mexican Guatemalan group have the same property, and I will have the opportunity to provide you with more than one example. In the meantime, let's return, please, to the letter O, and remember that if the sound expresses to you the idea of an extent, it's that of an extent more or less circumscribed. Hence, no doubt, its application with the consonant S, J, or C, making ko, the puncture or piercing, or oz or oj, the cave, or the exhalation that escapes from it, to the eruption of the volcano, perhaps the first that erupted on Earth. Hence the idea, so strange in appearance but so true and expressive, of having originally represented volcanoes by heads whose mouth was the crater. Indeed, take the plates from Stephen's work or from the Waldeck album. Examine the cartoons in them and place all the heads you find there horizontally with their faces up. You will immediately see in this profile the silhouette of a mountain. The nose and the chin will be the most prominent features, and the mouth will be an abyss or a crater, the opening of which may even appear to extend to the ears, that is, to the deepest cavities. The idea is quite simple. However, who would have guessed this without the comprehensive set of clues provided by the variety of my studies? It is only after this discovery that I came to understand the extreme variety of facial angles observed in the heads from Palenque. Looking at them, one would say that all the nuances of the human species have passed through here, and that the builders of these ancient palaces wanted to engrave on their monuments the specific features of all the nations they had conquered. The truth of this I do not know. But what I do know I can affirm today without fear of being wrong is that the human faces in the cartoons are profiles of mountains, and perhaps these silhouettes and their variety offer a memory of the mountains where volcanoes existed. A simple glance at the figures, Telchines, Telchins, or Kabiri from the Trano manuscript, whose mouths are generally most significant in this respect, will suffice to convince you. So here is what the first O and the first M reduce to: the path, that is, the surface initially, and then a circumscribed area in Mexican, and in Quechua, the thing or the twisted place, the necklace. Then, if you add to this primitive root the suffix ch or chi, meaning down, at the bottom, you get och in Nahuatl, which means the expanse with depth. In Quechua, it means the ground painted with bright colors, an image of the sea on fire. But uch, identical with och in Mexican, means in Quechua the opossum, because of the pouch where the female keeps her young. From this also comes the Mexican word poch, meaning smoke, popo, meaning vapor, and atachi, meaning from below, from the abyss. That's why in the Quechua language, to express the idea, the ancient idea of an earthquake, it was said that the opossum opens its legs. Finally, from all this comes the word tachon, tiochtli, rabbit, the T here standing for the preposition T in the languages of Central America, which only appears in the compound words in Mexican. Section 14. Are you not as amazed like me to see how all these names and symbols in the ancient languages of America, seemingly so distant from each other, ultimately converge to express the same ideal and are encapsulated in the hieroglyph that served as their starting point? We must evidently admit, continues Mr. Renan, speaking of the origin of language, in the ancestors of the human species a special feeling for nature, which made them perceive with a delicacy we can no longer fathom the qualities that should provide the names of things. The faculty of discernment, which is but an extraordinary sagacity for discovering relationships, was more exercised in them. They saw 1,000 things at once. Nature spoke to them more than to us, or rather, they found within themselves a secret echo that responded to all the voices from the outside and turned them into words. No doubt, this trace would be ungraspable if we had only the languages of our continent to follow. However, thanks to Mexican documents, we can go back, if not to the most ancient source, at least with certainty to the streams that originally flowed from it and which have been preserved, almost in their primitive purity, in the group of Mexican Guatemalan languages, closer to the ancient cradle. As you have already been able to see more than once, words in these languages retain their primary meaning, and the populations themselves have preserved this exquisite sensitivity, this delicate tact that distinguished their ancestors. All Europeans who have traveled among the red and coppery races of America can attest to this. Let us continue the theme that I had begun to develop concerning the rabbit and the opossum, a side of which I still need to explain. I spoke to you about Telin, the sunken land, and Telin, the engulfing ocean. These two ideas are constantly represented in the hieroglyph of the lost land associated with that of the abyss into which it descended. This is how Osiris identifies with the Nile, and Isis, the Earth Mother, symbolizes at the same time the human element she contains in her vase. In turn, Oxomoco, the Mexican Isis, symbolizes the American Earth, the mother of gods and men, doubling their ancestor. According to the Popol Vuh, the generator, the nurturer par excellence, the great weaver, is depicted in the stories as always full and always greedy. This explains the translation of pregnant and gluttonous woman, which historian Veitia gives to this name, based on Ixtlioxochitl, and which relates so specifically to Isis, according to Plutarch's idea. This is one of the most remarkable aspects of this myth, and I want to show it to you once again in the various hieroglyphs of the submerged land, as well as in the words that are its spoken image. The opossum in Mexican is called Tlaquatzin, the Lord who devours, or the anus that grinds the loo. The mole, Tazon, which is another feature of the hieroglyph, means the yellow feather, the flame that extends, or more radically, what extends underground or in the fire cave. Can anything be more expressive? Ba, which is the mole in Quechua, also means a mouthful, something that is swallowed. When we move on to the symbol of the tiger, we find the Quechua word balam, or rather bal-am, which means spider, the glutton that spins around. If we decompose bal-am, we find ba'al, the embryo of the mole, something underground from Orcus, with for spider, or rather the being that engulfs within its threads, swallowing everything. In the Mexican language, the tiger, Asalaro, offers a similar meaning, the dark path of the cave, or Azilodo, literally the liver's path in the cave. According to the current meaning of the word El, it is still Orcus, or the abyss, the bottom of the earth, like the bottom of the ocean, where the great land animal was swallowed. Do I need to speak further about the dog, whose symbol is also that of Hecate and the moon, like the wolf or jackal, about which I will have the opportunity to speak later? The dog, the wolf, and even the horse have in turn become hieroglyphs for the same mythic idea. Among the Aryans, it is the horse that prevailed for the sacrifice, although the Veda, older than Aryan rule in India, generally only speaks of the cow. You will find in this context how, according to Pausanias, from the violent union of Poseidon or Neptune with Demeter or Demeter, i.e. the sea and the earth, the horse was born, whose symbol was connected to the mysterious worship of Ceres in Arcadia and Attica. From there come the dominant features of various representations of Neptune, with a stern exterior and almost wild gaze, disheveled hair, and italic nickname Consus, which obviously originates from the Mexican Con or Comitul, the moon's vase mentioned earlier. In the story of Erixicton, punished with insatiable hunger for cutting down a poplar in a grove sacred to Ceres, you find another myth of the great episode of the cataclysm that I will develop later. The sacred grove is the earth in general and or the whole of America as it existed before the catastrophe. The cut tree is that portion of the continent removed by the waters, by the devourer, by the hungry, the sea, which provides the various forms of the hieroglyph, and so on. Through various transformations, the moon goddess becomes a lunar god, just as we will see Nahuatl and Tezcatlipoca emerging from the thigh, like Bacchus from Jupiter's thigh, taking on the attributes of Apollo. As for Medea, I do not need to draw your attention to her again. You have already noticed the initial syllable, mi, the mysterious primitive form of mitzli. Thus, always with the moon, with the earth, the idea of the sea, of the voracious ocean, the idea of gluttony that the Mexican language remarkably renders through the expression Ipistiotli, the god, or the ultimate divine glutton. Yeah, man, we steady translating, steady going. Part 4, coming up part 5, we're going to go through this whole thing. All 4 letters translating from French. We got to get the correction. We got to get the understanding. We got to get the overstanding. It's so important, y'all, because this book has been in French. A lot of people reference him, but and speak or take little tidbits out of what he's saying and put it in their own books. But to get the full overstanding of what he is saying in a conversation of letters to someone of high prominence, we can understand, because this Brazier de Bourbourg, this the dude translating everything. You dig what I'm saying? And as we went through in like the first part, how he stated, he did so much work in his younger years. 25 years later, he's coming back and doing more work and understanding where his faults were. And it all comes full circle. So we're going to keep translating this part 4. We're coming up on part 5. So we're going to keep going. Until next time, I love y'all. Peace and blessings, y'all.